Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this CAFII webinar with Superintendent of Insurance officials from Western Canada provinces. My name is Keith Martin, and I am Co-Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Financial Institutions in Insurance, or CAFII. On behalf of myself and my Co-Executive Director colleague, Brendan Wicks, and the CAFII Board of Directors, thank you for joining our webinar today. The Canadian Association of Financial Institutions in Insurance is a not-for-profit association dedicated to the development of an open and flexible insurance marketplace. Our 13 members include the insurance arms of Canada's major banks and credit unions, along with their insurer business partners, which underwrite credit protection insurance and travel insurance. This is the third of 3 summer 2020 webinars we have staged with insurance policy and regulation authorities from across Canada. Today, we are pleased to have a panel representing Manitoba and Alberta. I want to mention that today, the government of Saskatchewan will drop an election writ. And as a result, Jan Seibel, who is the Director of the Insurance and Real Estate Division at the Financial and Consumer Affairs Authority of Saskatchewan, and who was going to join us today, no longer can, as civil servants cannot participate in public meetings during an election period. We hope to have Jan join us in a future webinar. We are, however, very pleased to have Scott Moore, who is the Superintendent of Financial Institutions and Superintendent of Insurance at Manitoba's Financial Institutions Regulation Branch, FIRB, join us today. Scott has over 20 years experience as a regulator in the financial services sector, along with over 9 years experience working in the private sector in the insurance industry. FIRB is responsible for regulatory oversight of the insurance sector, credit unions and caisses populaires, and trust and loan companies operating in Manitoba. Prior to joining the government of Manitoba in 1996, Scott was with Zurich Insurance Company and Federated Insurance Company of Canada in commercial underwriting, marketing, and loss prevention. He has also been a vice chair of the Canadian Council of Insurance Regulators, the CCIR, since 2017. Scott holds a Bachelor of Arts degree and certificate in Applied Management, Public Sector Specialization from the University of Manitoba, in addition to a diploma in Commercial and Industrial Sales from Red River College in Winnipeg. We're also pleased to have join us today David Sorensen. David Sorensen became Alberta's Deputy Superintendent of Insurance in 2014. Before joining Alberta Treasury Board and Finance in that senior insurance policymaker and insurance role, he was Director Regional Claims West at Unifund Assurance, and he also served as Claims Manager at Thompson General Insurance. David has 29 years of experience in the insurance industry, 13 of which were spent in claims. Now, both of these individuals is very busy, and we are very grateful to each of them for making the time today to participate in this CAFII webinar. Now, I want to mention that today's webinar will be recorded and posted on our CAFII website in the near future. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to our presenters during the Q&A session, which we have allocated 20 minutes for during the concluding section of today's webinar, please send them to me as your host using the Q&A function of Zoom, and I will pose them on your behalf. Unless you specifically request in your question to be identified as its source, I will pose all questions to our panelists on an anonymous basis. And just before we get the webinar underway, I want to extend a special welcome to a number of VIP guest attendees. In addition to many representatives from our 13 CAFII member companies, we have attendees today from allied industry associations, such as the Canadian Life and Health Insurance Association and the Travel Health Insurance Association, and from insurance and financial service regulators and policymakers from across Canada, including the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, or FSRA, the Financial and Consumer Services Commission of New Brunswick, or FCNB, the Alberta Insurance Council, British Columbia's Financial Services Authority, or BCFSA, the Office of the Superintendent of Insurance, Government of Nova Scotia, the Insurance Council of BC, the British Columbia Ministry of Finance, the Insurance Councils of Saskatchewan, and the Government of Yukon. Welcome to you all. I would now like to begin by asking the first question, and that question is what each of our panelists feels has been the biggest COVID-19 driven surprise to them in their work as insurance policymakers and regulators. Scott, let me call upon you first to get the conversation started.
Well, thank you very much, Keith, and to yourself and Brendan, thank you, and CAFII for providing this opportunity. Certainly we are busy, but having said that, I'll obviously want to make ourselves available to the respective sector and all of the different entities and organizations that you identified, because it is important to have those open lines of communication, especially during times such as this. In terms of the biggest surprise that we would suggest that occurred maybe in Manitoba is generally how quickly, given the circumstances, we were able to adapt. It's obviously not something that we have not pandemic plans in place, but obviously situations where we've looked to the past if we ever had to work from home. And we are part of an integrated regulator. We're a smaller branch within the Manitoba Financial Services Agency, small staff of about 4 people. And when obviously things started to transpire, and I recall it vividly during the week of March the 9th, we took steps initially to make some determinations as to how best we would be able to proceed and work from home. And that was something that, like I say, didn't come together as quickly in some areas in the larger divisions within our integrated regulator, but our smaller branch, we were able to be up and running very, very quickly. The other thing that we would like to note certainly and recognize is the role that our insurance council played, and because there were certain things that I'm getting a little ahead of myself here and I won't get into a lot of specific details, but to work with our insurance council in order to ensure that the intermediaries and the role they play were not inhibited by the pandemic and the operations of the insurance council. So like I say, the biggest surprise would essentially be how quickly we were able to adapt. I attribute that in a large part to the size of our organization being smaller, but certainly we would like to believe that our respective stakeholders, be it on the insurer side or the intermediary side as it relates through the insurance council, were able to continue to do business in Manitoba. To you, Keith.
Sorry, thank you very much, Scott, much appreciated. And David, could I ask you to comment on this?
Sure, Keith, and welcome everybody, and thanks for this opportunity. The backdrop that you're seeing behind me, I took that picture this summer. It's of Raleigh, a small town in south central Alberta. We had a lovely tour of southern Alberta, and so that's a little bit of a plug. Summer in southern Alberta is awesome. And Brendan of CAFII, I think, would attest to that, because I understand he was out this summer also. I'm pleased to be coming to you from the Stanley Cup city. Stanley Cup was won last night. All Canadian, and there was no rioting, I'm pleased to report too, so at least not in Edmonton. In terms of a surprise for us here in Alberta, we were prepared for a bit of an onslaught, and a little bit concerned, going into working from home and the challenges that brings. We were prepared to hear from more and more Albertans about things that were going wrong for them in terms of the insurance and their needs around COVID. And we were pleasantly surprised that didn't materialize. That's kudos to the insurance industry, travel insurance industry in particular, health insurance industry. Also in terms of marshaling the resources and developing the messaging, reassigning staff at the same while moving into their own homes and such. And so I want to pay a bit of a thank you to those insurers and their staff for making our job a little bit easier with respect to that. I do want to add, though, that we're not out of the woods, I would say, because over the last month that we've seen a bit of an uptick in the number of complaints about delayed and denied travel claims. So back to you, Keith.
Well, thank you very much for that, David. And let me follow up with you and ask you, just in terms of your own organization, how difficult has it been for you and your colleagues to continue to work and carry out your organization's mandate under COVID-19?
I would say it's been moderately difficult, and I think the biggest challenge was the quick move home. We're an office-based branch. We work on desktop computers for the most part, and we're not really that able to easily move home, but we did it. We had a number of technological challenges in terms of staff not working from work computers now, but working from their own computers on our system. So I think it was moderately difficult, mostly because of technological challenges. The virtual world with Zoom and Skype and WebEx really helped a lot keep the team connected and us kind of coordinating our response to all the things that we needed to do as a regulator during the pandemic and business as usual. So,
thank you, David. And how about your situation, Scott, in your organization? How difficult has it been for you folks?
Well, as I alluded to earlier, we're a small branch within the MFSA, and essentially myself and my deputy on the deposit taking side, both him and I have been in the office almost every day. The balance of our staff, they have been working from home. We're working from home up to a maximum of 2 days a week. However, now everyone is in fact back in our office. The balance of our organization and the securities and the real estate arm, they continue to have a number of people who are working from home, but the intention was to move towards bringing everyone back into the office, similar to some other jurisdictions from what I understand. However, having said that, within the last 2 days within Winnipeg, we've been bumped up to what's called the restricted level orange, which is going to be in effect for the next 30 days, which essentially means we're going with the masks, and which I gather is similar to a number of other jurisdictions, but there's maximum gathering sizes now for both inside and outside. So it looks like obviously certain, probably the balance of our office, not within FIRB, but within the organization, will be backing off from the complete return to work. And obviously it doesn't seem dissimilar to things that we're hearing obviously in a number of other jurisdictions where a lot of the restrictions, are starting to increase. So it'll be the status quo for now. We'd certainly hope to be a little bit further ahead as an entire organization with everyone being back in the office, but we'll be sitting here, I guess, for the next 30 days and we'll see what next steps the provincial health officials take. So.
That's very interesting, Scott. What about you, David, in Alberta? Are you folks back in the office or not?
Yeah, we mostly returned in July, but we are working for the most part virtually just from the office. So,
so no meetings, not as much interactions.
Not as much interactions. We still have, small meetings in large rooms, but for the most part, we're still working virtually.
Okay, excellent. Let me follow up on a different issue with you, David, and I'd like to ask you if there have been any unique features to the pandemic, the responsive industry, or the insurance regulatory or policy response in your particular province. So anything unique to Alberta that you'd like to share with us?
Well, as you may not know, the regulators across the country, through the means of CCIR, were in weekly, if not more often, meetings. And we were talking about the challenges that we were facing and working together on solutions as the case may be. But one thing I noted about us is that we had the good fortune, and it was coincidental, of in 2019, we took steps to remove many of the remaining barriers to conducting insurance transactions completely electronically. For example, we approved the e-Pink card in 2019. We removed the prohibition against terminating a policy electronically, and that's, of course, if you have consent to communicate electronically with your insured. And so from my perspective, there were fewer challenges faced by insurance companies because of because of those changes in Alberta than necessarily were faced elsewhere in the country.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much for that insight. Scott, what about in your neck of the woods? Anything unique to your province?
Well, certainly tying into some of David's comments relevant to obviously our role and the working group that was established through CCIR to communicate with the industry, that has been provided a lot of assistance to all of us in terms of exchange of information, but also to, in a number of cases, at least provide a common message to the industry. In some cases, and as David had alluded to, they're obviously in Alberta further ahead than we are here in Manitoba relevant to the electronic documents process. But having said that, certainly those are the types of things that on a going forward basis that we are going to be looking at adopting as well here. But to David's point as well, the obtaining consent, because we are certainly aware that there were some insurers in the marketplace who weren't necessarily doing what was required to ensure that they were obtaining consent properly. It was almost to the point of where certain documentation was going out and they were going down the path of if they didn't receive anything back, it was implied, almost a negative option of sorts. So there were some of those that were looked into, and that issue has since been remedied, but we can understand and appreciate that it may be something that the industry felt that it was doing in favor of the consumers, but certainly, it is something that obtaining the proper consent is necessary. The one thing or another area that I was going to specifically refer to in Manitoba, and it does tie into our insurance council, is the insurance council through their rules, which in turn are approved by the superintendent and myself, is we had to work with the insurance council on some of the licensing rules relevant to our level 1 general agent license holders. Those individuals, of course, and obviously a number of people who are on the webinar are aware of the fact that in Manitoba, at the present time, under a level 1 agent license, those individuals are limited to operating exclusively within an agency. Given the circumstances, those rules were suspended. I approved those. They originally came into effect on March the 18th, and then subsequently have now been extended 5 times up until at least November the 15th. We were hoping that may be the last time or the final time. Having said that, given what I alluded to earlier, relevant to the level orange, et cetera, that certainly may not be the final time. Time will tell. So obviously that's on the radar. And then back towards the latter part of March 30th to be exact, I also approved the deferral for the requirement for the mandatory continuing educational requirements, and we pushed those out till May the 31st, 21 for all of the licensed agents, and June the 30th, 21 for all licensed adjusters. So just a couple of items that are unique to where we had to work with our insurance council and ensure that the industry was still able to continue to do business.
That's really interesting, Scott, and I might like to dig in a little bit deeper on that. I think you partly answered the question I'm about to ask, but I'd like to ask you whether there are any additional new, unusual, or elevated types of misconduct issues or fair treatment of consumers' concerns, or even consumer complaints with respect to insurance that have occurred during this pandemic period.
Well, in response to that, actually, I'm pleased to actually answer no, and maybe to some extent, it may be unique to David's situation. Being a jurisdiction where we don't have private auto, that helps from the perspective of consumer-related issues that we deal with here. But the one thing that certainly was unique, and I gather it's because consumers, like everyone else, had more time on their hands, we were actually receiving a number of inquiries and formal complaints from people regarding issues that they have been disputing with their insurers and or agents, etc., for the last year or two, and it's as though they had some time on their hand to bring those types of complaints our way. So that was definitely unique, but it was surprising, and this kind of ties back to one of your earlier questions, but in terms of not seeing a real significant uptick. We saw initially some of the travel related issues at the outset, but there was nothing of any real significance. But the one thing we are seeing now, and this is just even over the course of the last couple of weeks, is some of the school tours and some of the issues related to people who are trying to get compensated. And we're sorting through one right now, not so certain as to whether or not it's specific to the insurers or it may be more relevant to the actual travel agency. So time will tell whether that's an issue that falls within the scope of our office, or it may actually end up over at the Insurance Council, or could even end up in our Consumer Protection Office. And the last item relevant to travel is essentially the airlines offering the credits versus the refunds. We receive some of those types of inquiries, but not necessarily, of course, an issue that's relevant to any particular insurer. So those are, like I say, I felt it was all positive in terms of not being surprised. So that's always a good thing under these circumstances, because there's been enough surprises.
Right. Well, thank you, Scott. And David, is it a similar experience or different for you in Alberta?
Very similar. I have a few things that I wanted. I mean, for the most part, insurers have been very responsive, and my thanks again to the industry. I wanted to touch on a few things that we noticed, and these by no means are things that we would call, oh my God, the sky is falling things. But I thought I would share them in terms of some things that we were noticing cropping up a little more than usual. And I think this was related to the pandemic to some degree, maybe working from home, but a couple of insurers, significant insurers, had a noticeable significant drop in sales and service levels for a month or two during the summer. And that caused us a little bit of grief for a while. And we worked with the insurers to ensure that they were, working through it. And I'm confident that they're going to be post-morteming it and figuring out what happened and what they can do to mitigate it in the future. It was pretty disruptive, I would say, at the time, but I think it's behind us now. The second thing we heard, and this is on auto insurance, is a few insurers and clinics asking about e-treatments. So seeing your physio electronically, and how should the policy respond to that? And there was a bit of a call to our office to issue a bulletin providing guidance on that. But I'm pleased to say that, a little bit of interaction with clinics and with insurance companies, they've figured it out and worked through it without any intervention really from the superintendent's office. So I appreciate that. The third thing, as I mentioned earlier, is we have seen just a little bit of an uptick in travel insurance related complaints. And I think they're related to what Scott just talked about, school trips in part, but they're delays in claim payments and in some cases claim denials that consumers are calling our office to complain about. But other than that, there's really nothing that was new or unusual, I think, flowing from the pandemic in terms of market conduct or regulatory issues.
Thank you for that response. And I'd like to pick up on one component of that answer, David, which is, you're mentioning that wait times in some cases were higher than normal. And in the absence of physical interactions, the industry has attempted to provide digital means and tools to consumers, and consumers have readily adopted them, such that we're hearing in the industry that maybe a trend that was moving in that direction and would have continued to develop over 5 or 10 years has accelerated in 6 months' time. And indeed, the fact that we're having this meeting digitally, where previously we might have had it in person, is another example of that. So I just wanted to ask you, and I'll start with you, David. I just wanted to ask you both about your thoughts on digitization and consumers' adoption of it, your own adoption of digital means as regulators, and whether you see that trend as ongoing, and whether there are any other trends that you've observed in this pandemic that you think may become permanent features or have greatly accelerated in terms of adoption by consumers. So let me start with you, David, on those various themes.
Well, I think COVID has definitely placed a greater emphasis on the need for us to be flexible. We all need to be flexible, flexible enough to stop going to work and work from home and still get your job done, flexible to deal with, distancing, and I imagine from an insurance company's perspective, flexible. How do you manage a claim, but not necessarily have the means to get out and see it? Or how do you sell a life policy that you normally would negotiate or discuss face to face when you can't get out there and interact? So there has to have been lots of flexibility brought to bear, and in our office it's no different. Insurers were calling to ask about flexibility, and it's something very simple of a request that we made from a regulatory perspective of the insurance company. So flexibility in terms of our expectations. We had many an insurer ask for a flexibility with respect to getting consent, to Scott's point before, to deal electronically. And I think that in terms of what we should expect, or what we've taken from this, is we need to be flexible. We need to adapt as these kind of challenges, knock on wood that this one doesn't arise again, but others will, in an industry where it's important to be able to continue to deliver business as normal or near normal. Having said that too, Albertans will continue to come knocking on our door when they have issues. And so it's not only flexibility, but I think it's extremely important for regulators and the industry to have a good working relationship. Because when I look back on the challenges that we faced through COVID, more often than not, it was the industry that was providing the solution. It was the industry that was bringing the resource to bear to figure it out. And I think about the cross-border trucking issue with travel and health insurance for truckers who were going into the U.S. to keep our important trade moving so that we can weather the COVID storm to a large degree. But traditionally, health policies like that have an exclusion for going into a level 3 advisory country, and the whole world was level 3 advisory. So the industry worked to come up with a solution for that, and I remember thinking, man, this is easy. This is easy for me to brief the minister on this one because it's already figured out. And it was nice also to kind of pretend to take all the credit, but it really wasn't. It was the industry. And I think as we look forward and we consider other challenges that COVID is going to bring, we most definitely will need, as regulators, to heavily rely on the industry to solve the problems that are going to crop up.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to just add, as we work to make it easier for industry to do business in Alberta, it's absolutely important that we consider, you know, how do we support, how can we be flexible to assist an industry in you know, providing the important products that we need in this society.
Well, thank you very much, David. And Scott, could I ask you to comment on these issues of trends and what's here to stay? What is going to be a permanent shift in the sort of system? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay. Well, certainly I would echo all of David's comments without having to repeat them. And certainly I similarly, you know, the industry certainly has to work with regulators to ensure that the regulations are keeping or helping and not hindering what I would describe as an unprecedented opportunity to drive change in the industry. And having been in the industry myself, I know that traditionally it's been a little bit slower to adapt in certain areas, not every, but certainly. But this has been an opportunity, I believe, for all of us. The other thing that I see going forward is the potential and an increase in the appetite for usage-based insurance. Essentially, and again, not being a private auto jurisdiction, but still, obviously, it does tie together because we do have private insurers who are writing excess coverage, and so that is something there. And I think that some of the main barriers, you know, is obviously been in the past this privacy and security type issues. But given the experience of consumers now, I would have to believe that they're going to have a much greater appreciation for, you know, the vehicle sitting in the driveway, and there'll be a shift towards the types of things that maybe in fact they were opposed to before, and it'll be an attractive one that everyone will be at least considering more so than they would have in the past. To some of David's points, just want to kind of top it up a little bit and certainly commend the industry and some of the things that they did, and be it on the property casualty side and the life side as well, of course, but is the flexible payment options relevant to deferrals, the claim handling, as David alluded to, almost in a virtual way. Obviously on the life side, similarly with a lot of things that it sounds like the virtual type appointments and telehealth and those things of that sort. Those are things that certainly sound, when you hear people in the health sector, that are here to stay, and to the credit of likely to a large degree the insurance industry. And in terms of other areas, the industry was very active in helping Canadians return back home, and that ties into a lot of the things that we were engaged with. I say we, David and I, and other CCR colleagues, and being briefed on those types of issues on a weekly basis, in terms of some of those things as they originally evolved back in March and April. And the commercial trucking, that was another notation here, so I am repeating some of the things that David did say. But like I say, those are the types of things that certainly we would want to commend the industry. And like I say, I think we take advantage of this unprecedented opportunity to advance certain things, both to the benefit of the industry and, of course, consumers as it relates to the fair treatment of customers.
Thank you very much for that, Scott. I'm just going to take a pause before my next question and just remind those who are attending this session that you are most invited to ask a question. If you just scroll down to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A tab. And if you click on that, you can send a question to me, and I will pose it to either or both of the panelists on your behalf. So please feel free to let me know what's on your mind, and we'll certainly be pleased to reflect that. Scott, in your answer just now, you mentioned some of the things that you think the industry did well, and I want to thank you on behalf of our members for offering those comments. But we want to also hear from you about the things that you think we could have done better. What areas do you think the industry, you know, as we have lessons learned after this is over and as we reflect on it, could have improved on. And you know, I know in a previous panel, previous webinar, one of the panelists said that it's very important for industry and regulators to have conversations after this is all settled to really develop an understanding of when something like this happens again, what did we learn? What do we need to do again the same way, and what should be done differently? So those are some of the themes I was hoping to ask you to reflect on, please.
Well, I guess tying into one of my last comments in response to the last question, relevant to the fair treatment of customers, I think certainly the expectation of myself and I gather other regulators would be, you know, be patient with consumers. And I think that certainly the industry was very responsible, generally speaking, in terms of dealing with consumers and adapting. And it ties in, and I'm repeating myself here, relevant to, you know, deferrals, things of that sort. On the life side, the one thing that I neglected to mention here, a couple things, was, you know, like waiving the standard period for short-term disability benefits, for example, and also making it easier for patients to access their benefits, like waiving the requirements for doctor's notes and lab tests, etc. Those are the types of things. I don't have anything specific in terms of being critical, because I think that from the perspective as a CCIR member, and in terms of the way, you know, we reached out to the sector, and the sector in turn reached out to us, and the working groups that were established, and a lot of the open lines of communications that were developed. Not to suggest that in all cases, you know, were we all on the same page, but I think it was important that we all understood that there were certain things that couldn't be done in a harmonized way, be it on, let's say, for example, the electronic communication and cancellation, things of that sort. But at least it was understood, and I think the air was cleared, and then there wasn't these, you know, the industry wasn't left with the impression that we were able to do certain things that we weren't, because we were inhibited in some cases by our legislation, for example. So I would not have anything specifically to be overly critical of, but I would certainly say that, you know, in terms of going forward, you know, we have to keep in mind that obviously the methods of products being distributed, obviously towards a more digital model, are changing. I know that speaks to, obviously, and to a large extent, the way, you know, your members, for example, et cetera, distribute their products. And I think that obviously in the intermediary sector, there are going to be some that have not maybe adapted as quickly as they could or should, and there's going to be costs associated with that, of course, and they're going to have to work towards obviously being able to service their clients and the consumers in a more digital or remote fashion. And so, like I say, those are just some of my general takeaways, but certainly maybe once we get into the questions, certainly can elaborate further, and maybe others have specific examples. So
Thank you for that, Scott. And David, let me ask you for your perspective on this question.
Sorry, Keith, fumbling for mute. And I also have a little bit of background noise here that I was just working to contain. So hopefully it's not too disruptive, and I apologize for any disruption. In terms of this office and COVID-19, I think what I see the biggest impact, and this is, you know, a bit of a surprise for me, but not that much, I guess, is, as we mostly know, the property and casualty industry in the world and in Canada and in Alberta is in the hard part of the cycle. It's pretty hard. And everything that I've been reading is that COVID is making it harder. And so as consumers, as businesses, you know, are struggling to make ends meet, to figure it out in the midst of COVID, many are coming to us with concerns about their struggle to find affordable insurance, to find any insurance. And we see that in hospitality, we see that in not-for-profit organizations who have more exposure in terms of COVID, perhaps. We also see that, and this was not necessarily about COVID, but we see that in the property insurance world. Condominiums are a big concern from an insurance capacity perspective. And so what I think the industry, and the industry is getting a blacker eye because of this. It's a natural response, you know, and when people struggle with premium increases and to understand why they aren't able to access the insurance they used to be able to access. I mean, that's a slight on the industry, and the industry doesn't need any more slights. It has an image challenge as it is, and so as an industry, we, and I'm including regulators in this, we have to pull out every stop in terms of communicating with consumers about what is happening, what are options, and not relying on lame excuses like it's the government's fault or you know, this is just the way it is. And we see a few of those come through our door and wonder, you know, this is not helping. So the challenge that I have for the industry is how can we most effectively communicate with struggling consumers around insurance capacity and price.
All right, thank you for that, David. I want to just shift a little bit now to the international scene. And I know the CCIR Secretariat does good work in terms of sharing with CCIR members and with regulators across the country some of their findings around how other international jurisdictions are responding to issues, and certainly on COVID-19. I believe they have done some work in terms of how other authorities in other countries and other parts of the world have responded. And I'm wondering, have you become aware of any international developments in insurance policy or in regulation that you believe might make its way to Canada? David, maybe I'll start with you. You're on mute, David.
And I was expounding so sagely. So not so much, but where I think I'll go with this is, and Scott talked about this, is usage-based insurance. You know, with COVID, most people stopped driving. I share that I put a lot more miles on my bike than I did in my car during the shutdown. And the nature of automobile insurance is that it doesn't react to that change very effectively. Insurers were all over, you know, rebating premiums, the goodwill payments, you know, ignoring NSFs, doing all kinds of things that they could do. But in terms of changing the policy because of the change in the use, it is quite a hands-on kind of manual process. So it emphasized the need for us to really think about, you know, how can we make, and going back to flexibility, how can we make the industry more flexible in these circumstances, and pay-as-you-go insurance or usage-based insurance seems like a no-brainer for that. So there's nothing you have to do if you park your car because it's already taken care of.
Okay, thank you, David. And Scott, would you like to jump in on this?
The only thing that I would add relevant to anything internationally to your question, Keith, is on the commercial side relevant to business interruption. And obviously there's been no coverage for viruses and or pandemics. But having said that, obviously there has been some legal action in Europe and in France in particular relevant to AXA. And the industry moved forward after one case there to voluntarily, from what I understand, pay certain claims. Now, having said that, there are things occurring in Canada and elsewhere within North America relevant to to BI, and it's not obviously something that insurers were ever contemplating covering, but certainly has some implications for the industry subject to the outcome of those particular cases as they move forward. So certainly, you know, as a market conduct regulator, but as also a prudential regulator, those do create some element of concern. So, but that would be the only area that I would speak to further to what David had alluded to on the international side.
All right, thank you, Scott. Let me now shift a little bit to travel insurance, and you know, certainly it's the hope that lockdown and social distancing restrictions will eventually ease in Canada and around the world. Government travel advisories will eventually be relaxed, and some non-essential international tourist travel will begin to be allowed. And I'm wondering if you could comment on whether you see the whether you are expecting from the travel insurance industry to meet any particular new objectives or expectations that might not have been an issue before in the context of the pandemic and some of these shifts that I just described. So I'll start with you, Scott, and I might also add that an issue for the industry is that some consumers are making claims for canceled tickets with an airline where the airline has offered them a voucher. So if the claim is paid out and the voucher is eventually used, that's in a sense double dipping. And that has put the industry in an awkward position because, you know, it's not the industry's fault that the airlines have chosen not to refund consumers. So that's a supplemental travel insurance question that I might ask you to comment on. Let me start with you, Scott.
Okay, certainly in terms of the industry and the associations, back to the CCR working groups, I mean, certainly they were responding to the issues in a very proactive way and anticipating a lot of the issues that I don't suspect that some of us, obviously in the regulatory regime or the regulatory world, pardon me, would have anticipated. Obviously right now, and I know it was something that was touched on a little bit earlier, the travel industry, of course, is obviously in duress, and having said that, is looking to try to get people traveling, and obviously there's not a significant appetite, and there are these products now that are being introduced by the airlines to essentially induce people to travel and provide the COVID coverage. So whether, you know, and anyone's guess is as good as mine, of course, but having said that, what the uptake will be, it just doesn't seem like there is an appetite, and it certainly question as to where in fact it is all headed. But in terms of, to your other question, Keith, yeah, I mean, you can have empathize with the industry that if in fact consumers are in a position, yeah, where they're obviously being compensated on one hand and they're receiving the credit elsewhere, it is obviously putting the insurers into a very difficult position. So I would concur with that.
Thank you, Scott. And David, let me ask you to comment on these issues.
In terms of voucher, if I can start there, I'm as Scott said, it's a difficult spot. Transport Canada has permitted insurers to offer vouchers as opposed to refunds. One has to be concerned as an insurer and as an airline about cash flow. And what my expectation of insurers is that they, and from my understanding is that they're willing to look at exceptions. I had to cancel a flight, or a flight was canceled for me, I should say, because of COVID. And I currently hold a voucher for that flight, and I'm happy. I'm happy because I know I'm happy with that. I'm content with that because I know I'll eventually use it. But there are cases where it won't be used. I know insurers are dealing with exceptions on a case-by-case basis and providing refunds in certain cases. It is a challenge. Beyond those comments, I don't think I'll say any more. But On the other side, on the other question, and maybe Brendan, sorry, can you remind me what it was? Keith, not Brendan.
Yeah, no worries, David. It was essentially that with travel eventually beginning to tick up, are there any expectations that you as a regulator have on the travel insurance industry that are new in the context of this different environment?
So no, not new. I go back to my point about emphasizing the need for clear communication. The challenges that we see coming out of COVID with travel insurance is that travelers had certain expectations and were surprised by limitations or exclusions. Now that the industry has created a product that will provide coverage for certain COVID-related losses, the need for clarity and transparency on what is covered and what isn't is extremely important. And so just an emphasis for the industry to be very transparent and upfront about what the coverage does and how it responds in those typical circumstances that we're seeing out there now. I wish the industry all the best. I know the fact that it developed a COVID kind of product this quickly is impressive to me. It's continuing to want to compete out there in a world that I'm sure it is got to be really difficult for travel agents and insurance providers. So other than that, nothing in particular, Keith.
Okay, I just want to quickly touch on another issue. There's so much discussion of COVID that sometimes, there's a risk that we're not talking about other pressing issues that our society faces. And one of those issues is, of course, climate change. And it's a subject that from a life and health insurance perspective, of course, P&C industry has been looking at climate change and its impact on that insurance sector for a while. But life and health insurance is also now paying more attention to this because there are significant implications for that part of insurance. And we had a presentation by Deloitte and a webinar with Deloitte on this very issue. The presentation's up on the research section of our website for anyone who's interested. And they were able to provide evidence of how there are mortality, morbidity, and health implications from climate change that are already having impacts on the insurance industry. So I just wanted to ask you both, and I'll start with you, David, whether this is something you're starting to look at from a regulatory perspective, climate change and its potential impact on life and health insurance.
So the short answer is we're paying attention. We're very interested in where this goes. Weather is having a significant impact on property and casualty. It's having clearly an impact on life and health. And as society seeks to adapt and insurers seek to adapt, we want to hear from insurance companies about how we can help support them in terms of continuing to provide the coverages that society needs in a growing realm of risk. So,
Great, thank you, David. And Scott, comments from you?
Just to supplement David's comments, certainly it's not something we have specifically looked at in Manitoba, but however, as a smaller jurisdiction and being a member of CCIR, it does tie into potentially some of the working groups a working group that is dealing with issues not in that specific area as it more relates to life and A&S, but definitely on the P&C side. And I think that provides maybe an opportunity, not speaking on behalf of CCIR, but does provide a window of opportunity to maybe widen, in terms of what potentially issues we may consider within that working group.
Thank you, Scott. To both of you, thank you so much for joining us today. I only have one question left because we've come to the end of our webinar, and the hour has flown by because of how insightful and interesting you both were. So very much appreciated. I want to end the webinar by asking you, Scott, and you, David, for any final thoughts, any final words to the wise, any parting comments that you wish to make. Scott, let me start with you.
Okay, I know that we're tight on the clock here, so I would just restate one of the points I had made earlier in terms of taking advantage of this opportunity, unprecedented opportunity to try to draw a positive out of this. And I think that the lines of communication between ourselves as regulators and the industry relevant to ensuring that we give consumers the ability to access the products in the market and communicate effectively are things that we will now have that opportunity to further build upon. So that would be my final point.
Thank you. And over to you, David.
My words to the wise coming out of COVID is practice unmuting. I seem to get caught in that a lot. I don't have much more to say. I think the kind of the capstone for all of this this discussion, I want to say thanks again for hosting it, but I think the capstone is that you know, good things happen when regulators and insurance companies work together, and I think this is this has been evident, and so I want to thank the industry for the collaboration and their efforts through all of this.
Well, thank you for that. David Sorensen, Scott Moore, this has been really helpful, useful, insightful hour. We really appreciate your taking your time out of your busy schedule. And on behalf of CAFII and its members, have a great rest of your day, and we look forward to working with you in future. To those who are attendees, this webinar is now concluded. It will be posted on our website, so if you wish to have some colleagues who couldn't attend today take a look, feel free to find it there. Thank you all for participating, and I wish everyone a great rest of your day. Thank you.